Actually, this is probably the most conventional talk I will have ever done here, because you know, the Lafayette Escadrille, what's left to know about them at this point with all the coverage it has gotten from everybody, including myself? And the same can be said of that other famous unit. You can fight it out for all you want as to which is the most famous fighter squadron of World War I, the Lafayette Escadrille, Les Cigognes, the 94th Aero Squadron, or, well, that ultimate contender and certainly one of the most effective ones, the Red Baron's Flying Circus. And he has been, when it comes to the bad guys, he is just the most recognized, and what more can be said about him? Well, I found an excuse. The excuse is that 100 years ago today, Manfred Freiherr von Richthofen, well, let's get it in his own words. One fine day, a telegram arrived which stated, Leutnant von Richthofen is appointed commander of the 11th Jagdstaffel. I must say, I was annoyed. I had learned to work so well with my comrades at Boelcke's Staffel, and now I had to begin all over again, working hand in hand with different people. It was a beastly nuisance. Besides, I should have preferred the Orden Pour le Mérite. That was January 14th, 1916. 17. 100 years ago today, so I got my hook and I just couldn't resist. I might add that 2 days later, as the Baron puts it in his memoirs, 2 days later, when we were sitting sociably together, the men of the Boelcke Staffel, celebrating my departure, a telegram from headquarters arrived. It stated that His Majesty had graciously condescended to give me the Orden Pour le Mérite. Of course, my joy was tremendous. It was a balm on my wound. Some attitude for somebody who has just gotten his first command. Now, up to this point, Manfred von Richthofen had started out the war as a cavalryman, and soon had to face the reality that cavalry was not going to work that well in an age of machine guns. So he went into supply, but of course was bored stiff and ended up demanding a transfer to something with a little more action in it, with his pointed statement, I did not join the German army to hand out bread and cheese, but for another reason. So they put him in the air service as an observer, and then he learned how to fly, not easily. He was not a natural pilot, but he eventually got the hang of it. And then happened to run into a certain Oswald Boelcke, who liked the cut of his jib and asked him to join this new specialized fighter unit he was forming, Jagdstaffel II. And on September 17th, 1916, the Baron scored his first victory. By the January 14th, 1917, he happened to have noted the fact that Oswald Boelcke and Max Immelmann had received the Orden Pour le Mérite upon their 8th victories, and here he was with 16. Well, the standard was rising because the state of the art was improving, and it was becoming less and less difficult to shoot down enemy planes. But the Baron was up to 16, and he was ready to get his Orden Pour le Mérite and then some. Not only for the amount of victories he'd scored, but for the way he had scored them. On November 22nd, 1916, the late Oswald Boelcke's replacement as commander of Jasta II, Oberleutnant Stefan Kiermaier, had been shot down by a couple of de Havilland DH-2s of number 24 Squadron RFC. The very next day, Lieutenant von Richthofen got into an 8.5-minute turning dogfight with a skillfully flown DH-2 of number 24 Squadron, but finally brought it down with a bullet in the back of the head of the pilot, who turned out to be none other than 6th Victory Ace and Victoria Cross recipient and number 24 Squadron Commander, Major Leno G. Hawker. That alone would have probably given him a place in history, but as we all know, the Baron was just warming up. This is a DH-2 of the type that he had already run into and would occasionally run into again, which Hawker had made into briefly into the most potent machine over the Somme, until the Germans got some new aircraft, the Halberstadt D.I, D.II, and D.III, which were true biplanes, and but with only one synchronized machine gun, followed by the Albatros D.II with its twin machine guns, which practically tripled the rate of fire and became a really deadly plane when used by the right hands, and those right hands happened to be Oswald Boelcke's until his death in a mid-air collision on October 28, 1916. But Richthofen, in his memoir, which was written, keep in mind, during the war, was beginning to get some idea of destiny, or at least so he claimed, that on one occasion, and he swore that he'd only heard this secondhand, but that someone had said, which of the fellows is likely to become a good pursuit pilot? And Boelcke pointed his way and said, that is the man. Well, Richthofen, for his part, was interested in finding out, once he reconciled himself to having to move to this new unit. Jagdstaffel 11 under Oberleutnant Lang had been around almost 2 months, and it hadn't scored a single victory. The fellow was a decent administrator, he was a lackadaisical and uninspiring leader, and with Richthofen's record, the German High Command decided maybe he might make a difference. Well, did he ever. Richthofen wasted no time in instilling his aggressive spirit and the dicta Boelcke among the members of Jasta 11, and he also started having its Albatros D.IIs replaced with a brand new plane that had come out in December, the Albatros D.III, which was similar but had a sesquiplane wing, which gave it better visibility downward, improved the maneuverability, somewhat improved performance, certainly looked better, still had twin machine guns. Richthofen had a very high expectation for the plane. After all, the Nieuport had used the sesquiplane arrangement very successfully. And all this time, he saw to it that his men watched him in action, absorbed lessons from it over the next few weeks, and as he later put it, I never imagined that it would be so delightful to command a Jagdstaffel. Even in my dreams, I had not imagined that there would ever be a von Richthofen Staffel of airplanes. So, yeah, he got used to it, and they got used to him. And one thing Richthofen had a way of instilling in people was self-confidence, confidence in their leader, and an infectious aggressiveness that he encouraged. But the most amazing thing about him that I have heard from the 3 aces that I've met who served under his command, they did not idolize Richthofen the ace. they idolized Richthofen, the leader. And one of the things that he had a natural talent for was he'd be in the middle of a dogfight, fighting alongside them, and afterward he would line them up and tell everybody what he had done right and maybe not so right. He'd have an after-action report for everybody. He didn't miss a thing. Hans-Georg von der Osten scored his first victory. Richthofen congratulated him but gave him a little constructive criticism after this. And that was on the occasion of his first victory. This was the sort of thing that made Richthofen invaluable to the Germans and his loss so catastrophic to them. The photo shown here is of Richthofen incongruously looking on a bicycle, but still with that goofy grin. And behind him is what's clearly a red Albatros D.III. He had just received the thing, and as of late January, he was apparently already flying the red plane. It served two purposes. Let's face it, the guy had a bit of an ego. But also, and I've heard this from some Frenchmen who did similar things with their aircraft, it made him visible to his men, so that when it came to emulating his moves, it was easy for them to watch him in action. Also easy to form on him. Also, if he brought down an enemy plane, the ground troops would recognize who it was who shot it down. Richthofen again put it this way: "It occurred to me to have my crate painted all over in staring red. The result was that everyone got to know my red bird. My opponents also seemed to have heard of the color transformation." More on that later. After getting the men worked up on what he expected of them, on January 23rd, 1917, Richthofen had his first run-in how do I get rid of that?
Left click.
He ran into a couple of FE-8s, which were Royal Aircraft Factory pusher fighters, similar to and actually somewhat of an improvement on the de Havilland DH-2. But we're talking January 1917 now, and the pusher concept is, performance-wise, is getting long in the tooth. And yet numbers 40 and 41 squadrons are fully equipped with them, and the British are as aggressive as ever, particularly Second Lieutenant John Hay from just outside of Sydney, Australia, who on that morning shot down his third German plane. Another member of 40 Squadron who was serving with Hay was Edwin Benbow, whose score up to then was 5 or 6. So they were still wreaking their share of havoc with FE-8s, although I must point out that only 1 or 2 people made ace in the FE-8, and only Benbow did so exclusively. But Hay was on his way. He'd gotten his third that morning. The lad stopped for lunch and then went on a patrol at an afternoon patrol and had a run-in with some Albatros. Richthofen's combat report. About 16:10, I attacked, together with 7 of my planes, enemy Staffel west of Lens. The plane I had singled out caught fire after 150 shots, fired from a distance of 50 meters. The plane fell, burning. Occupant fell out of plane at 500 meters height. Immediately after the plane had crashed on the ground, I could see a heavy black smoke cloud rising. The plane burnt for quite a while, with frequent flares of flame. Jack Hay was Richthofen's 17th victory and the first for Jasta 11. Richthofen's next victory and the second for his Staffel occurred the next day when he brought down an FE-2B number 6997 of number 25 squadron RFC. The crewman, Lieutenant John Eric McLennan, pilot, and Captain Oscar Greig, were brought down for the first time, Richthofen claimed, alive. And he ended up crash landing his plane nearby when he ran into some barbed wire in forced landing. And he did get to have a talk with them, and he describes it as follows. During a fight on quite a different section of the front, I had the good fortune to shoot into a Vickers two-seater which was peacefully photographing the German artillery position. My friend the photographer had not the time to defend himself. He had to make haste to get down upon firm ground, for his machine began to give suspicious indications of fire. When we noticed that phenomenon, we say, he stinks. As it turned out, it was really so. When the machine was coming to earth, it burst into flames. I felt some human pity for my opponent and had resolved not to cause him to fall down, but merely to compel him to land. I did so particularly because I had the impression that my opponent was wounded, for he did not fire a single shot. When I had got down to an altitude of about 1,500 feet, engine trouble compelled me to land without making any curves. The result was very comical. My enemy, with his burning machine, landed smoothly, while I, his conqueror, came down next to him in the barbed wire of our trenches, and my machine overturned. The two Englanders were not a little surprised at my collapse, but greeted me like sportsmen. As mentioned before, they had not fired a shot, and they could not understand why I had landed so clumsily. They were the first two Englishmen that I had brought down alive. Consequently, it gave me particular pleasure to talk to them. I asked them whether they had previously seen my machine in the air, and one of them replied, "Oh yes, I know your machine very well. We call it Le Petit Rouge." That's French for the little red thing. Now, this had been written during the war, and Richthofen did not want Allied readers to know the real reason he had forced landed, in case you notice a discrepancy here. It was not engine trouble that had brought Richthofen down, and the reason he did not make any turning as he came in was because he had suffered lower wing spar failure in the course of the fight. The Albatros D.III, not for the first or last time in the next few days, was showing that that sesquiplane wing may have been just sturdy enough for a Nieuport, but it was not sturdy enough for an airplane with a 160 horsepower Mercedes engine and a plywood fuselage designed to go much faster and designed to be much heavier. Richthofen was among the first to find out, and he was lucky enough not to be able to profit from that knowledge and pass the word on. As for the burning FE-8, now mind you, this is not, FE-2B, that's not the same one, just to show you what the thing looked like. His two opponents had been so intent on their job, which was, after all, photo reconnaissance, that he had taken them by surprise. They were fortunate to survive. But upon landing, they set their own plane on fire, so it and its contents and the photographs would not fall into enemy hands. But nevertheless, they did have a few chuckles over the irony of their coming down in better shape than Richthofen. In spite of the damage to his Albatros D.III, it would eventually be repaired. And as a matter of fact, Albatros started recalling its D.III.s and began reinforcing the lower wing and adding more bracing wires, which by April 1917 would allow it to become quite an effective fighter. But that's another story. For the time being, Richthofen's confidence in his plane was shaken, and for most of the victories he would score in the time period I'm dealing with, he would fly something you don't normally associate with him. The Halberstadt. The Halberstadt had come out and arrived at the front in June 1916. As you can see, it's a two-bay biplane, a lot of wire bracing and stiffening, but a sturdy plane, decent performance, only one machine gun. For the time being, this became Richthofen's plane, as seen in this picture. Whether he painted any of them red or not remains open to speculation. But with maybe one exception during this period, until the end of March, his victories would be scored in Halberstadts. The next event with Jasta 11 would come on January 29th, when Lieutenant Georg Simon was wounded in action. But then things started to pick up. On February 1st, the Baron brought down a BE-2D, and both crewmen died of wounds. On February 5th, the first victory for someone other than the Baron occurred when Vizefeldwebel Sebastian Festner, an NCO from Bavaria, shot down a BE-2 north of Arras. On February 14th, the Baron scored his first double to a BE-2D of number 2 squadron and a BE-2C from the same unit. In both cases, one member was taken POW, the other killed. And in the case of the second one, the observer was wounded, but he managed to, the crew managed to get across the lines. They didn't always get shot down. On February 16th, Sebastian Festner scored again with a FE-2B, and Lieutenant Karl Almenröder shot down a BE-2C of number 16 squadron. Things were starting to sink in at this point, and the Baron was starting to get a unit together. On March 4th, as he brought his gentlemen up in force, Karl Schaefer, who had already scored earlier on the Eastern Front before transferring to Jasta 11, got his second victory, a Sopwith two-seater southwest of Hain. It was actually from number 11 Squadron, and its crew were missing in action. Richthofen got a BE-2D of number 2 Squadron, but its crew managed to get it across the line again, and they were unhurt. But he scored again with a Sopwith from number 43 Squadron, whose crew was killed. And then Schaefer scored, claiming 2 FEs, or DH-2s. This was during that same dogfight in which the Baron got his Sopwith. Lieutenant C. Usborne was shot up by an attacker as he was trying to come to the rescue. He and Lieutenant K.S. Henderson managed to make it over the lines in their FE-8s, and Schaefer's 2 claims were not confirmed, rightly so. That did it for February and started things off into March. And then on March 6th, things started to get interesting for the Staffel. And this is where we discover that pushers may have been out of date, but they were They were not quite the easy meat that the Baron was hoping they would be, perhaps. On March 6th, Jasta 11 Halberstadts attacked a flight of Sopwith 1½ Strutters of number 43 Squadron. Leutnant Karl Emil Schaefer sent one down in flames and got credit for a second in Allied lines. Richthofen was closing on another Sopwith when he heard an abrupt bang followed by the odor of petrol that was squirting around his legs and feet. Diving away, trailing petrol vapor, he landed at Henin-Liétard, where he found his engine damaged and both fuel tanks riddled and drained. On the way down, Richthofen noticed another Halberstadt was spinning down with its pilot, Lieutenant Edward Lüger, suffering a shoulder wound and a glancing blow to the chest, but he managed to land safely. Their assailants turned out to have been FE-8s of number 40 Squadron, and one of them was none other than Lieutenant Lobo Benbow, who was credited with a flamer. And Captain Robert Gregory claimed a Halberstadt that dived away vertically. Lüger was apparently credited to the Sopwith crew of Lieutenant Harold H. Balfour and Lieutenant A. Roberts. I would later meet Harold Balfour. He was a 6-victory Sopwith ace. Most of his victories would be in camels, but his first, in this case, was in a 1½ Strutter. It seems somehow apt that Benbow's 8th and last victory would be over the man who'd killed his friend Jack Hay almost 2 months earlier. Somewhat a blow to the Red Baron's aura of invincibility, but things would go differently for number 40 Squadron's FEs 3 days later. On March 9th, 40 Squadron had so far claimed 16 enemy planes destroyed and 7 out of control, when 10 FE-8s took off from Trézène at 08:45 hours. Second Lieutenant Leonard P. Blaxland had to head home when a rocker arm in his engine broke. The remaining 9 FEs were jumped by 8 Albatros D.IIIs of Jasta 11, led by Richthofen. On this occasion, however, the Red Baron's revenge was administered entirely by his gentleman. Schaefer shot down Second Lieutenant W.B. Hills in FE-8 6397, and Second Lieutenant G.F. Haseler in A4874. Lieutenant Kurt Wolf brought down Lieutenant T. Shepard. All 3 became POWs. This is Richthofen back in his red plane for the moment. And these are some of the FE-8s that had been brought down in this action. In this case, Shepard's plane, which turned over on landing, and he was taken prisoner. And I believe this is Hessler's FE-8, which was brought down intact. So, from the standpoint of number 40 Squadron, this had been a massacre. This is Kurt Wolf with his purple Albatros. He could now claim his first victory of what would eventually be 33. As for Richthofen, he would later claim a DH-2 southwest of Bayeux, flown by Second Lieutenant Arthur J. Pearson. He was with number 24 Squadron. He had had earlier run-ins with the Baron. This time he was killed in flames. Richthofen on this occasion, though, was flying Lügert's Albatros D.III rather than his own. But the bag for the day stood at 5. Jasta 11 was definitely doing better than it had before Richthofen had joined. Now, in regard to the purple Albatros you're looking at At about this time, the men had told Richthofen that they were not all that pleased with the idea of having a marked man leading them, that if he got enough of a reputation, everyone would be shooting at that red plane. Richthofen and them put their heads together and came up with an interesting remedy. What if all of the planes have some red on them, and then the members distinguish themselves with an additional color of his own choice? In some cases it was the entire plane, in others it would be a part of it. Here is one of Wolf's victims, an FE-2B that he brought down at Gavrel on March 31st. It was from number 11 Squadron. Second Lieutenants L.A.T. Strange and W.G.T. Clifton were taken prisoner. Karl Almenröder, who is shown here with his brother Wilhelm, had a red fuselage with a white nose and a white elevator as his distinctive color. And Karl Emil Schaefer had a black tail. These were some of their responses. Later, the front part of his plane would be red, but with the black tail. And this would also set a pattern for later German Jagdstaffeln, the idea of having a part of the plane in a common color, or a combination of colors, and then a personal motif or a color scheme for each person thereafter. All of this was the groundwork that was being laid in the process in a learning process that you might call March. The successes would continue. On March 11th, Lieutenant Konstantin Kreft, the technical officer, got an FE-8. Schaefer got a BE-2C, and Manfred, back in his Halberstadt D.II, got a BE-2D of number 2 Squadron, killing the crew. March 17th, Richthofen was now an Oberleutnant. His excellent performance in command of Jagdstaffel 11 had gotten him his first promotion on the road to Rittmeister. He got an FE-2B. Wolf got a 2-seater Sopwith, so did Almenröder, and then Richthofen finished the day off with a BE-2C of number 16 Squadron. March 21st, Almenröder got a BE-2D, Richthofen got a BE-2E of number 16 Squadron. March 24th, Schaefer got a Sopwith. Manfred got a SPAD, A6706, flown by Second Lieutenant Richard P. Baker of number 19 Squadron, who was wounded in the knee and taken prisoner. March 25th, Richthofen shot down a Nieuport over Tilloy, killing Second Lieutenant Christopher G. Gilbert was not killed. He was brought down and taken prisoner. Another of those lucky chaps who could say he survived a run-in with the Baron even if he'd end up a guest of the Kaiser. March 30th, Lieutenant Wolf got a Nieuport. Lieutenant W. P. Garnett for number 60 Squadron killed, and Almenröder got a Nieuport. Lieutenant D.M.F. Sinclair of number 40 Squadron, prisoner of war. And finally, on March 31st, Wolf brought down that the FE-2B that you saw a moment ago. And also joining up at this point was Manfred's brother, shown in the cockpit of one of his Albatros D.IIIs, Lieutenant Lothar von Richthofen. Manfred was overjoyed. Now the brothers could be working together. By the end of March, the Jagdstaffel 11, which had scored nothing in its first 2 months of existence, had officially accounted for 35 Allied planes, 11 of them by Manfred von Richthofen, only one of which, as far as we know, was brought down in an Albatros, and that was borrowing Lübert's. But by the end of the month, Albatros had convinced people that it had ironed the bugs out, and they were ready to fully re-equip it. At this point, too, not only Richthofen, but his men were starting to get enough of a name for themselves that it wasn't just Le Petit Rouge that the British were beginning to fear. Watching this unit that was going to all the hottest parts of the front with these garishly painted planes, it was starting to remind them of some kind of a flying circus. In this picture, we see some of his chief protagonists of the month to come. And you'll also notice that there is a closeness that exists among all of them. Even the NCO on the left there, Sebastian Festner, who's still a Vizefeldwebel, nevertheless has proven himself as one of the boys, along with Schaefer, Manfred von Richthofen, Lothar von Richthofen, and Wolf.
John, is this the origin of Air Force gloves? That previous photo?
It may well be, because a lot of the flyers, and you'll notice that also with the Lafayette Escadrille, there's a lot of putting hands in pockets there, if you remember Bert Hall, but then wouldn't he? But we see a lot of that here too. And by the time this picture was taken in late April, Richthofen had definitely found himself a home among a band of brothers, like Almenröder, Kraft, Festner, Schaefer, Wolf, Simon, Oskar Brauneck, Plüschow, Lothar, and wait, this is Kraft. I'm not sure which one that was, but he added a couple of victories to them. In any case, these fellows were just warming up when their D.IIIs started to go back into action in early April as the Allies launched a major offensive on the Western Front. They would contribute disproportionately to the 3-to-1 preponderance of victories over the British that would earn that month its remembered name of Bloody April. And the circus, including Richthofen, Wolf, they believe this may have been Kraft, Almenröder, and the rest, would become just as famous as the men who flew them, or as notorious, depending on which side of the lines you're from. The legend was only beginning, but what I have covered here is a formative period during which the Baron was learning how to be a leader, and in the process finding that perhaps he had more of a talent for that than even as a pilot, if you discount, of course, the fact that he was also a dead shot and a master tactician. But his best days and worst were yet to come.